All right, and welcome back to Techniques of the Week. This is our third installment of this series. Right now, we're going to be talking about the ABCs of behavior, including rewards and consequences, and how to avoid the behavior trap. And this is actually geared mostly towards parents. So, kids and young adults, if you guys are listening, feel free. But this one really is more designed to help your parents out in these soft and hard closure days. So here's the lesson outline. We'll do check-ins really briefly, the lesson of the day, a quiz on behavior traps, and yep, that's right, even adults get quizzed too, and then the best ways to get a hold of me. So check-ins from me. My bright spot today was we were able to keep a consistent routine with our 2-month-old Hadley. You can see it up there in the corner. We've got a good bit of structure going. The struggle I'm having goes right along with that, and that is that I'm having to wake up super early in order to get my tasks done so that we can keep that routine and keep her sane. I'm sure a lot of parents out there can relate to that struggle. And from you guys, I still haven't heard anything yet. I just keep looking at my computer, all sorts of lonesome. So if you've got anything you're willing to share with me, I would love to hear from you guys. I'm missing you a ton. So getting into the ABCs of behavior, I actually like to start with the B, which is the behavior, or what the child or student does with their body, voice, or attention. Then we can go back to the A, which stands for antecedent. And that is what happens immediately before the behavior occurs. And lastly, we have the consequence, or what does this child or student get from doing their behavior. So going into the behavior, this is what the child or student does with their body, voice, or attention. And two big things that need to happen for us to really start working with behavior is it needs to be observable and objective. Observable meaning that it's got to be something that you can actually see, measure, or verify. So if you're looking at, somebody took something out of the cookie jar, we've got a way to verify that that happened. There's a permanent product there. The real hard thing with being observable is we have to try our best not to make any inferences or presume intent. We really do want to keep it just on the facts. What did you see, or what are you able to observe, and keep it as simple as possible. In behavior terms, this is called an operational definition, and the more clearly and concisely we can define an observable behavior, the easier it is to make some sort of behavioral change. The objective component of looking at behavior is that we need to be able to take our emotions and feelings out of looking at the behavior. It can really, just like in Star Wars, it can really taint our judgment and perception if we get too emotional when we're looking at these behaviors. We need to be able to not take them personally and look at them from an objective lens. When I'm not an advanced roboticist or a computer programmer, but what I like to think of is if I were trying to teach a robot how to do this behavior, how would I do that? How would I objectively label and define this behavior if I was trying to teach a robot how to do it? And going back to the A for the antecedent, or what happens immediately before the behavior occurs. In strict behavioral terms, we would be looking at the immediacy before the behavior, so seconds to moments, and not really thinking about things before that happens. Because we are not doing this for any sort of advanced degree in behaviorism, we can look at things a little bit more generally and include triggers, signals, and setting events. So triggers are the things that might light the fuse for the behavior. These are things like if a sibling took a toy away, or if a student was asked to do work or chores, or if they got negative feedback. Those are things that might light that fuse for that behavior and might sort of make that behavior more likely to occur. Signals are cues that the child or student gives you that behavior is coming. So these could be things like tensing their fists, starting to breathe heavily, or eye contact, which could be either, full on or totally absent. So they might avoid any eye contact, or they might stare a hole into the depths of your soul. So these are just signals that we can start to piece together as, okay, some sort of behavior is coming, and we need to start preparing for what we can do to de-escalate or try to prevent that from happening. The last one on here are setting events, and these are things that set the stage for the behavior to be more likely. So these are things like not getting enough sleep, or being hungry, or having some sort of feelings of inadequacy or insecurity. So this is why with teenagers especially, we might feel like we're walking on eggshells a lot, because we don't always know what some of those feelings are that are going through their minds, and we don't know the whole setting event. So we could end up seeing a huge behavior and not really understand where it came from until we sort of go back retrospectively and dissect it. And, unfortunately, with a lot of behaviors, that's what we're left with, is something happens and we're trying to piece together what were the triggers, what were the signals, what were the setting events, so that we can try to mitigate this in the future. And that's okay, as long as we are able to debrief with the individual in a very objective way. I've always been surprised at how good students and younger kids are at looking at behavior rationally when we talk about triggers, signals, and setting events. Because if we're able to take the emotion away from this discussion, they're really able to give us a lot of insight into why they did what they did. The problem is a lot of times we get into a authoritarian, sort of drill and why did you do this? Why did you do this? And that can really, set up some defense walls. But if we talk about it in more objective terms, a lot of times we break through those barriers and just say, okay, well, in the future, let's find a different way that we can, behave and try to accomplish the same goal. The C is for consequence, and this is what the child or student gets from doing their behavior, from engaging in that behavior. And I've got a little bit of a soapbox here. This is not to be confused with what it is that you do. So a lot of people mistake things like, well, they hit their brother, so I gave them a timeout, that was their consequence. And that might be associated with the consequence, but the consequence is really more about what the student or the child gets without any response from anyone else. What did they get from their behavior? And that might be tied in with getting a reward or getting some sort of a consequence from you or a punishment from you. But really the consequence when we're looking strictly at behavior is, what did the child get straight from their behavior that didn't involve anybody else? And this can be primarily comprised of two basic functions. So we're kind of boiling it down to a little bit of a more simplistic approach, but I think this really works for most of the behaviors we're going to be seeing. The consequences we might get are either to gain access to preferred materials, attention, individuals, or activities, or it might be to avoid or escape non-preferred materials, attention, individuals, or activities. So a lot of the behaviors that we see are either to gain a preferred item or activity, or to avoid or escape some of those. So I ripped up my homework so that I would never have to do it. I was able to escape that because you're not going to be able to get another copy of my homework this quickly. Or what's another example? I stayed up late playing video games because I wanted to really access that game with my friends online. And yeah, you can ground me, you can take away my iPad, but I already got the game. So I already gained access to what I wanted to. So even though you tried to put a consequence in place, the consequence that I got from that behavior immediately was access to a preferred item. So rewards and reinforcement are things that increase the likelihood of the behavior to occur again. These can be tangible or intangible, things like treats or toys or iPad time if it's just access to an app or a game. Those would be tangible. Intangible rewards or reinforcement would be things like attention or praise, or iPad time if it's used for, some sort of social interaction like FaceTime or talking with friends. And one thing to keep in mind when we're looking at rewards and reinforcement is it's got to be tailored to each individual. So something that might be a reward or reinforcing for someone isn't always going to be reinforcing for someone else. So for me, if you were to say, if you do a good job on this, you can get a treat from Wendy's, I'm going to say, oh, that's okay, I'll just hang out here, I'm doing just fine. But if you were to tell me, well, you would get to go to Wendy's with a good friend or family member that you haven't seen in 2 weeks, my motivation is going to be much higher, and the salience of that is higher, so I would be more likely to follow through with whatever the behavior expectation was. So schedules can help make rewards a lot more effective or easy to implement. And there's a couple of different types of schedules. A continuous schedule, an easy example of that is training a dog. So every time the dog sits on command, it gets a treat. These are great for learning a new behavior. The problem with these is they're exhausting, and you're going to run out of patience, stamina, and dog treats. So most of the time we jump to an interval or a ratio schedule of reinforcement where it's if you do something within a certain interval or at a certain percentage, you can have iPad time or some other reinforcer. The final one that I'll talk about is a random schedule of reinforcement, and that's, sort of like a gambler's fallacy of if I pull on a slot machine lever, I might get a big reward. Might not, but if it's only costing me a penny to play and I might get $1 million, I'm going to keep pulling this because it's low cost at this moment and there could be a potential big buyout. The problem with that is we can all see how that would become addictive and you're probably not going to, win out in the long run. Gambling aside, we can capitalize on some of the addictive properties of a random schedule of reinforcement in a controlled setting with, some very clearly defined behaviors. And if you're interested in coming up with a random schedule of reinforcement for a behavior that you're seeing, I would be more than happy to help. They can be very effective. Some of the things that you might have seen at home include things like the star chart, where every time you engage in a behavior, you get a sticker or a star, and so many stars are associated with a prize. Another one is the good job jar or the marble jar, where every time you do something, you can put a marble in the jar, and that can be, you can divide that into different lines to say once you get halfway, you get this reward, 3/4 this reward, and so on. Another one that I really like, and I hope you guys can see it, and this is something called chart moves, and they're all over the internet. You can find them in a lot of different places, but really you can make your own with just a black and white clip art of your kid's favorite thing. So what you do is you get that clip art, and all you're doing is drawing little dotted lines around the outside, the perimeter of it, and every time they follow the directions or engage in the appropriate behavior, they get to connect it, and when they get to the circled dots, they get some sort of small reward. When they get all the way around it, they get a bigger reward. Just a different way to make a schedule for reinforcement. The next component of consequences and punishments, these are things that decrease the likelihood of the behavior recurring. These are typically things that include a loss of a positive or preferred task, item, or activity. So things like timeout or grounding or taking away video games, iPad time. You can also look at these from a token economy. So you lose out on some of your allowance, or you've got a bad language jar. For us adults, it could be like a speeding ticket. And again, these are things that decrease the likelihood. So getting one speeding ticket doesn't always lead to behavior change. So it just sort of depends on how big that citation would be or how valued that currency would be for you. So timeout's another one. We've got some students that really respond well to timeout, where missing out on that social engagement is a very salient punishment. Other kids are just fine. Put me in a chair against a wall. I don't care. I'm happy to be by myself. So that's not a very effective consequence or punishment for those students. The other end of the consequences and punishment spectrum would be the addition of a negative or non-preferred task. So oftentimes this is, well, you're going to have to do more chores to work that off, or I'll have you do another couple of math practice pages, or you need to write a letter of apology about what you've done. There are some other aversive techniques that are not endorsed by educators, so I won't really talk about those, but essentially this is just an addition of a negative consequence or something that the student doesn't like. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about the behavior trap. This occurs when we inadvertently reinforce a negative behavior. It's usually when we have reached our frustration tolerance and give in. What happens is we need our kid or student to stop doing something, so we let them have something that stops that behavior from occurring. There's an asterisk there because it does stop the behavior from occurring, but only temporarily. The problem is we are able to decrease our frustration level temporarily, but our kids learn that by engaging in that behavior, they can get something that they want. So that's sort of the trap. We inadvertently reinforce a negative behavior that we don't want to see. So 2 ways that you can avoid the trap. The first one I'll talk about is precision requests. And I'm going to go through this hierarchy, even though it's a little bit long, but you might say, please, Joe, can you wrap this up quickly? And then you're going to wait 3 to 5 seconds, and that can feel like a really long time. We humans are not very good at waiting, but that is a soapbox for a different presentation. So you wait 3 to 5 seconds, and if the student or child complies, then you reinforce that with praise, attention, and possibly some other tangible reward. Or if they're not compliant, then you pull out the bigger request of "you need to." And that really becomes a key word to say, okay, we're not just joking around. You need to wrap this up. And you wait 3 to 5 seconds. Compliance, reinforce. Non-compliance is where you would implement a reductive or an unpleasant consequence. The question I always get with this is, okay, what is the unpleasant consequence? So that's where thing 2 comes in. And this is a consequence hierarchy or a what-if chart. And this is something that you do in advance. So you come up with common actions that would result in consequences. So things like not following directions, or hitting your brother, or not doing your homework within this period of time. And you would write those out and figure out what consequences you guys all agree on for what would happen if that's the case. So that way, if you're using the precision requests and you get to that bottom unpleasant consequence, you know exactly what's going to go there. One thing I like to do with this is have the child or student sign the consequence hierarchy, just because that gives a little bit of buy-in and says, no, remember you agreed to this. And I would, print this on little pieces of paper, carry it with you so you can just pull it out whenever you need it. So on to our quiz. We are getting there. Sorry, this is a little bit longer than I was anticipating. So let's say you're at a grocery store and Elmo asks for a toy when his mom Dorothy refuses. He throws a tantrum, he yells, he cries, and he refuses to move. So Dorothy does well here and still says no, but eventually compromises by giving extra video game time at home. So the first question is, what 2 behaviors are present both from Elmo and from Dorothy? I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about that. So Elmo's behavior was throwing a tantrum, while Dorothy's behavior was giving a reward when they got home. So the 2 antecedents, one for Elmo's tantrum and one for Dorothy giving a reward when they get home. So these are the things that are happening before they decide to engage in those behaviors. So for Elmo, what do you guys think? So for Elmo, it was seeing the toy. And for Dorothy, the antecedent was having to deal with the tantrum in the store. That's why she decided to engage in the manipulation. Well, she was the one being manipulated, but why she decided to engage in the compromise of giving extra video game time at home. And last question, the consequences. So what did Elmo get from his behavior, and what did Dorothy get from hers? Well, Elmo didn't get the toy that he wanted, but he did still get a reward. And Dorothy got a preferred environment where passersby weren't looking at her like her child was having some sort of huge meltdown, and she was able to get done with her shopping trip and get home. So Dorothy got a preferred environment, and Elmo got a reward. Problem is, down the road, next time they go to the store, we know what's going to happen, right? So that is it for today. Again, these are the best ways to get in touch with me. Email is preferred, but if you've got a longer story or don't feel like sharing in an email, my voicemail is 801-402-5476. You can also text me at 801-923-2114. And for the kids, I like to throw in something fun, so Harry Potter reference for platform 9 3/4. All right, I hope to hear from you guys soon, and take care out there.